Okay. Well, my name's Robert Sherborne. I worked at the Tennessean for a little over 30 years. I started as a state beat reporter, then worked in general assignment, then became an investigative editor, or an investigative reporter, and then an investigative editor. So I saw a broad range of different things through the years.
That's pretty much my first question is just the basics of your job history. Did you work in a newspaper before you were at the Tennessean?
Yes, I worked at two papers before that. I worked in Clarksville for the Leaf Chronicle, where I got fired, and then I worked at the Tullahoma News in Tullahoma for about 6 months before I got a job at the Tennessean.
And excuse me for being slightly ignorant here. I'm not actually from Tennessee. Where is Tullahoma?
It's probably 45 miles south of Murfreesboro. It's about 70 miles from Nashville.
And what was that paper called? The
Tullahoma News.
News. Okay. So I know, based on some of the research that I did, that your investigator, or your team, did you have a team at the Tennessean?
Yeah, when I was the investigative editor,
Yeah.
I had a team of reporters that varied in size from 2 or 3 to 5 or 6 at different times.
And what were some of the major things that you remember while you were at the Tennessee that your team investigated? You can give as much or little detail as you want to, just generally. What were some topics that you investigated?
Well, throughout my career, there's probably 3 things that stand out. One was very early in my career at the Tennessean, where Jerry Thompson and I, and he was another reporter there, got involved in the case of Leo Frank, who was a Jewish businessman in Atlanta who was wrongfully accused and convicted of murder back in 1913. And we found and brought forward a witness who proved that the man who had accused him was lying, and ultimately got a posthumous pardon for him. And that was a fairly significant story, both nationally and internationally, because they took this man from prison and lynched him. And he was, I think, the first Jew lynched in America. And the events of his case led to the creation of B'nai B'rith, and also led to the resurrection of the Ku Klux Klan. So it was a fairly significant development. I misspoke. It led to the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, not B'nai B'rith itself. Second case that I remember, second series of stories, again, was done with Jerry Thompson and myself, where we uncovered Medicare fraud that was taking place on a national scale, involving hundreds of millions of dollars. And our reporting led to congressional hearings and ultimately changes in the law and the indictment of people in Pennsylvania for defrauding the federal government. As the investigative editor, when I had other reporters working for me, I think probably the story that stands out most was a series of stories we did on illnesses around this nation's nuclear development sites, such as Oak Ridge and Hanford and Washington. And two reporters that were involved in that, Susan Thomas and Laura Frank, spent several months talking to people, interviewing people, first in Oak Ridge, then at other sites around the country. And ultimately, their reporting led to the creation of a fund to compensate workers at these who had spent their lives at these nuclear sites building this country's nuclear arsenal during the Cold War, led to a fund to compensate them for illnesses that doctors and epidemiologists couldn't really explain. And so they decided to try to help them out, even though they could not prove that these illnesses stemmed directly from their work at the sites.
I saw some of that coverage on the internet. It was really interesting. In general, was there a set amount of time that you guys would spend researching and interviewing and writing these stories, or did it depend on the topic?
Well, it largely depended on the topic. Investigative reporting is kind of a crapshoot because a lot of times what you think is happening does not pan out. And so you spend an awful lot of time and an awful lot of the newspaper's money with no result. So it takes top editors and publishers with a good deal of grit to realize that they may not get much return on some of their investment in investigative reporting. Fortunately, during my time at the Tennessean, the two top editors, first John Segenthaler and then Frank Sutherland, made a commitment to investigative reporting, fully aware of what was involved. And they didn't, neither one of them ever said, well, you've got, 2 weeks to turn the story. They gave me and my team the leeway to really investigate. I mean, sometimes you'd find out in 2 days that there wasn't a story there. But sometimes we would spend weeks, not often, but sometimes we would spend weeks before we really found out that it just wasn't there.
Do you remember what was the longest amount of time you spent on the story?
I think probably about 18 months as a reporter. There was a federal farm financing agency that we found that the people running it, or at least the head of it at one office, was engaged in a lot of self-serving transactions. And me and another reporter spent about 18 months in about 6 or 7 states really running that to ground.
This question is very related, but maybe you have a different answer. Do you have one story that sticks out in your mind as the most memorable, or the most interesting, most difficult, whichever way you want to take that? And if you don't, that's okay.
Well, as I said in the beginning, I think perhaps the Leo Frank story was the most memorable to me. It was fun to work on. And required an unusual group of skills, because the witness that came forward was 82 years old when we first met him, and that presented challenges that you don't really face with younger people. So it stands out as one of the top ones. Now, you know, the Medicare fraud that resulted in congressional hearings, I mean, that obviously stands out. It's not, you know, not that often that reporters are requested to testify before Congress, as Jerry and I were. And of course, the nuclear site story, which helped a whole lot of people in the long run. People that just felt perfectly powerless to deal with their health problems before our reporting.
Going back to the Medicare story and the congressional hearings, talk a little bit about what that was like to be in those hearings. What were you?
Well, it scared the hell out of me. I mean, I was, you know, that's the kind of thing that I'm completely unaccustomed to. And there were, as I recall, either 3 or 4 different hearings. Now, Jerry and I were asked to testify at one of them, and we covered a couple of others that took place on the same subject. No, but it's for somebody like me, it was very frightening. I mean, that's sitting down and having a group of senators sitting around up on their dais asking you questions, and you know, that it's different for a reporter. It's not what reporters are typically accustomed to.
While you were doing all of this investigative reporting, did you or your team win any kind of awards or special recognition?
Yes. Oh boy. I know that within the Gannett Corporation, which is the largest newspaper chain in the country, or was then, they have an annual awards thing, and I think that I know that our Oak Ridge reporting, or our nuclear sites reporting, won their top award. I believe that the Medicare package won their top award. Leo Frank story won a national headliner award, and some other things. As a reporter, I was involved in a joint effort to investigate the Butcher banking empire, which involved reporters from the Tennessean and the Knoxville paper. I spent several months on that, and that ended up winning the John Hancock Award for the best business reporting in the country. And there's just, just a slew of different things from the State Press Association and that sort of thing. And I know that one member of my investigative team, John Schiffman, who's now with the Philadelphia Inquirer, he did a series of stories on the death penalty in Tennessee, and that ended up winning the Thurgood Marshall Award. So, yeah.
Okay, going back a little further into history, what was it that made you want to be a journalist? Who or what inspired you to decide on this
Well, I enjoyed writing and sort of got channeled into journalism because of that. And once there, I found that, the reporters have a real potential to help people and, to uncover wrongdoing, which struck me as a fairly worthwhile undertaking. So I sort of was encouraged to pursue those avenues.
Obviously, in the last 2 decades, newspapers and journalism has changed a lot. So talk a little bit about what it was like for you being involved in newspapers in the 70s and 80s and even, the 90s or...
Well, excuse me. When I came to the Tennessean, it felt to me like I had found a home. It was much different then than it is now, of course. But that paper was run in such a way that all the reporters really felt like they were pulling for one another. It had a very distinct and strong sense of family about it almost. We not only worked together, we drank together, we played together, and some of the closest friendships of my life are forged at that paper. I think some of that has changed since then. Hard for me to comment on what it's like there now because I haven't been there in 4 or 5 years, but it was a very different place then when I started than when I left.
To confirm a little of my research, did you retire after you were done at the Tennessee? Or did you work somewhere after that?
No, no.
And let me see here if I have what year you retired. Is it in 2007?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think are, either the very most valuable or some of the valuable lessons that you learned during your career?
That's kind of a tough question. I think I certainly learned a degree of skepticism, both for official statements, but also just ordinary people can very much present themselves in ways that are flattering to themselves, but are less than a complete picture. But I also hope I learned compassion. I know that as a police reporter, I covered stories that just, it just rips your heart out. And you learn just, how fragile and frail life can be and how quickly everything can turn from rosy to nightmarish and completely out of the control of the people involved.
What would you say is your greatest contribution to the world of journalism?
Well, I'd like to think I had great and lasting contributions, but as the skeptic I am, I fully realize that, you know, most of my contributions were transient and fleeting. And, you know, I hope that maybe by working with me, some younger reporters were encouraged and, you know, directed towards, you know, doing the best work that they could. I mean, if there's a lasting contribution, it would be in the people that I've worked with. And, you know, through the years, I've worked with some awfully good people. I will say that. I worked for them and I worked with them. Just top flight people.
What advice would you give to future journalists?
Run. I mean, seriously, I think the environment now is such that it's very, very difficult to plan a career around journalism. You know, now that may change as and if the web develops in a way that if somebody can figure out how to really make it pay for itself, the journalism I know may return. But, you know, right now I think you're in a situation where newspapers, who primarily did most of the investigative reporting, not all of it. TV does some good investigative work, but it costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and I don't think right now many newspapers either have or want to spend the resources doing it. And so I just think it's difficult for young reporters to find a niche like I did that will last for decades. I think it's very easy for young reporters fresh out of school to get involved and be very enthusiastic. I think it's much harder for somebody who's 40 or 50 and been in the business for 2 decades to sustain that.
So, in your opinion, what are some of the ways that journalism has changed since the time that you were in it and to what you kind of observe now? And do you think that the change, I kind of already know this answer, but do you think the changes are they good changes? Are they bad changes?
Well, I think, excuse me, I think that there have clearly been some good changes. You know, I know that when I started at the Tennessean, they were very much in competition with the Banner, the afternoon newspaper. And what you could never do is get beat by the Banner. Well, on the one hand, that was good to bring news forward. On the other hand, it led to an awful lot of poorly written stories and stories that were not as well thought through as they should have been, because you had to get it in the paper before the Banner did. So I think that the quality and caliber of the stories that are in the paper are much better now than they used to be. On the other side of that, you don't see nearly the depth of reporting today that you used to see. There's just not as many stories presented, and those that are presented oftentimes do not have the depth and breadth that you would want. So, I know that when I started the Tennessean, oh gosh, there were beats after beat after beat. And over time, those have diminished. I don't think we even have beats that cover lots of the things that we used to cover. And to me, that's unfortunate, because, part of a big part of a reporter's job is to get inside the story to see what's really going on, not what the officials want to tell you is going on or whatever. It's very difficult to do if you're not on the ground, inside, the courthouse or the police station every day.
Those are basically all of my questions. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything we didn't cover that you want to mention? Other comments?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you kind of know what you're looking for, so I could sit here probably for hours and ramble on, but that's not what you want. So.
No, I'm trying to think. Are there any other stories that you want to mention that you did? Any anecdotes that you think are interesting that you want to tell, or?
Well, that's difficult to say, because through the years, I wrote hundreds of stories, and as an editor for the last several years of my career, edited hundreds more, and I fortunately got to see things, be involved in work that was able to change some things, and big things and little things. I know that when I was cub reporter at the Tennessean working the police beat, I covered a fire where man's house, his mobile home, burned down, and he didn't have any insurance on it. And he and his wife and his kids didn't know what they were going to do. And as a result of that story, there was an outpouring from the people of Nashville, which they provided him enough money to get a place for his family to live and to get back on his feet. And it's, you know, it's that kind of story that you kind of go, wow, you know, it's something you don't expect, but it does happen. And, you know, fortunately in my career, it happened time and time again. So as I say, you not only learn the skepticism, but you learn the compassion in yourself and in other people that presents itself in surprising ways.